Tyler Brennan spent his last $2,000 on a 1987 Ford pickup that barely ran, a decision everyone in Cedar Falls called foolish. He needed transportation for work, and this rusted-out truck was all he could afford. But when his service dog, Ranger, started pawing obsessively at a spot beneath the passenger seat, Tyler found something that wasn't meant to be found. A letter, yellowed with age and written in trembling handwriting, addressed to a name he'd never heard. What Tyler didn't know was that returning this letter would connect him to a family searching for closure, and a fortune they'd given up hope of ever finding. This is the story of how one veteran's last desperate purchase became the first step towards something none of them saw coming. The check engine light had been on for 3 weeks before the Civic finally died. Tyler Brennan stood at the edge of Holloway's Auto Salvage on a gray Tuesday morning, staring at his options and trying to make the math work in his head. His job at the lumber mill started Monday. No truck meant no job. No job meant no apartment, no food, no forward motion, just another slide backward into the pit he'd spent 18 months clawing out of. He had $2,137 to his name. It sat in a checking account he was afraid to look at, the balance blinking like a countdown timer every time he checked his phone. He needed something that ran. That was it. Not pretty, not comfortable, not impressive. Just something that could get him to the mill and back for the next 6 months until he could save enough for something better. Ranger sat beside him, ears up, watching Tyler with that steady, knowing look he always had. The German Shepherd had been with him since the VA matched them 2 years ago, and he'd learned to read Tyler better than anyone. When the anxiety spiked, Ranger leaned in. When the memories came at night, Ranger was already there, pressing his weight against Tyler's chest before the screaming started. He was more than a dog. He was the reason Tyler was still standing. "You see anything you like, boy?" Tyler asked, his voice flat. Ranger's tail swept once across the gravel. The lot was a graveyard of old Detroit steel, dented Chevys, sun-bleached Dodges, and a handful of Fords in various stages of decay. Most of them were priced at $3,000 or $4,000, well beyond Tyler's reach. But near the back, half hidden behind a stack of bald tires, sat a 1987 Ford F-150. Navy blue, though the paint had oxidized to something closer to gray. Rust crept along the wheel wells, the tailgate was dented, and the driver's side mirror hung at an angle that suggested a losing argument with a mailbox. Tyler walked toward it, Ranger padding silently beside him. The sign on the windshield read, $2,000 firm. He circled the truck slowly, running his hand along the bed, checking the tires, crouching to look at the undercarriage. The frame was solid. The tires had life left. The engine, when he popped the hood, looked like it had been maintained by someone who cared. Clean oil, no obvious leaks, belts that weren't cracked. "She's not pretty," said a voice behind him. Tyler turned to find a man in a grease-stained coverall walking over. Holloway himself, probably. He was chewing on a toothpick and squinting at Tyler like he was trying to figure out if this was a buyer or a browser. "Runs good?" Tyler asked. "Started every day for the last owner. He drove her until he couldn't drive no more. Estate sale situation." "What happened to him?" "Died. Family didn't want the truck. Just wanted it gone." Holloway shrugged. "She's yours for $2,000. Cash." Tyler looked at Ranger, then back at the truck. $2,000 would leave him with $137. Enough for gas, maybe groceries for a week if he stretched it. No cushion, no safety net. If anything went wrong between now and his first paycheck, he'd be done. But without the truck, he was already done. He pulled out his phone, stared at the balance one more time, and felt his stomach drop. Then he opened the banking app and started the transfer. "I'll take it," he said. Holloway grinned and extended a hand. "Smart man. She'll treat you right." Tyler didn't feel smart. He felt like a man stepping off a cliff and hoping the ground would rise to meet him. But he signed the title, took the keys, and climbed into the cab with Ranger beside him. The engine turned over on the first try, rough but steady. He pulled out of the lot and onto the road, gripping the wheel with both hands, his jaw tight. Behind him, the salvage yard disappeared. Ahead, the road stretched out under a pale winter sky. Ranger pressed his nose against the window, fogging the glass, and for just a moment, Tyler let himself believe this might actually work. 3 days later, the transmission started slipping. Tyler felt it on the way home from his orientation at the mill. A shudder when he shifted into third, a hesitation when he tried to accelerate onto the highway. His hands tightened on the wheel, and his chest tightened with them. Not now. Please, not now. He made it back to his apartment, barely, and sat in the parking lot with the engine idling, staring at the dash like it might offer some kind of answer. The check engine light wasn't on, not yet, but he knew what that shudder meant. He'd worked on enough trucks during his first enlistment to know the sound of something getting ready to fail. Ranger whined softly from the passenger seat, his head tilting. "I know, buddy," Tyler said quietly. "I know." He turned off the engine and sat in the silence, calculating. His first paycheck was 2 weeks away. He had $83 left after filling the tank. A transmission repair would cost $500 at minimum, probably more if the shop decided to gouge him. He didn't have it, wouldn't have it for weeks. And if the truck died before then, he'd lose the job before he even started. He climbed out of the cab and stood in the cold, his breath fogging in front of him. The apartment complex was quiet, most of the units dark. His was a studio on the second floor, small and bare, but it was his. He'd signed the lease 2 months ago after spending a year bouncing between shelters and the back seat of his Civic. It wasn't much, but it was stability. It was the first rung on a ladder he'd been trying to climb since coming home. Now, the ladder was shaking. He trudged upstairs, Ranger at his heels, and unlocked the door. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and the plug-in air freshener he'd bought at the dollar store. A mattress on the floor, a folding table, a plastic chair. A single lamp. He'd planned to buy furniture once the paychecks started coming. That plan felt very far away now. Tyler sat on the edge of the mattress and put his head in his hands. The familiar pressure was building behind his eyes, the one that came when things started spinning out of control and his brain couldn't find a way to stop it. He'd felt it in Kandahar when the convoy got hit. He'd felt it at the VA hospital when they told him he wasn't eligible for the program he needed. He felt it now, sitting in his empty apartment, holding on to nothing. Ranger climbed up beside him, not waiting for permission, and pressed his body against Tyler's side. His weight was solid, grounding. Tyler reached over and rested his hand on the dog's back, fingers curling into the thick fur. "I don't know what I'm going to do," he whispered. Ranger leaned harder into him. They sat like that for a long time, the room growing darker as the sun slipped below the horizon. Tyler didn't eat. He didn't move. He just breathed, slow and deliberate, the way the therapist had taught him, trying to keep his head above water. Eventually, he lay back on the mattress, still dressed, and stared at the ceiling. Ranger curled up beside him, his muzzle resting on Tyler's arm. "I'd do it again," Tyler said quietly. "Buy the truck, I mean. I had to try. That's all I can do, right? Keep trying." Ranger's tail thumped once against the blanket. Tyler closed his eyes. Tomorrow he'd figure out the transmission. Tomorrow he'd call the shop, see if they did payment plans, see if he could beg, borrow, or barter his way into a repair. Tomorrow he'd find a way. But tonight, in the dark, with his dog beside him and his future uncertain, all Tyler could do was lie there and hope that trying would be enough. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window in its frame, and beneath it, the sound of the old truck ticking as its engine cooled in the parking lot below. Saturday morning came cold and bright, and Tyler decided to do what he could for free. Clean the truck out, check the fluids, and hope the transmission held together long enough to get him through the week. Ranger jumped into the cab ahead of him, circling twice before settling on the passenger seat. Tyler grabbed an old rag from behind the seat and started wiping down the dash, clearing away years of dust and grime. The previous owner had left behind a few things: an expired insurance card, a dried-out air freshener, a handful of receipts faded beyond reading. Tyler gathered them into a pile, planning to toss them, then crouched to sweep beneath the seats. That's when Ranger started pawing at the floor. At first, Tyler ignored it. "Knock it off, bud. Probably just an old French fry." But Ranger didn't stop. He whined, scratched at the rubber mat, then shoved his nose beneath the seat and pulled back with a low, insistent bark. Tyler frowned. All right. Move." He pushed the seat all the way back on its track and crouched down, running his hand along the underside. His fingers brushed something, paper, stiff and wedged into a gap in the frame. He tugged it carefully, and a yellowed envelope came free, its edges soft with age. Tyler sat back on his heels staring at it. The envelope was sealed, the flap brittle, and across the front, in shaky cursive, was a name. Eleanor Whitmore. Not the previous owner's name. Holloway had said the man's name was George Fenton. So who was Eleanor? Tyler hesitated, then carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. The handwriting was the same, unsteady, like it had been written by someone whose hands no longer obeyed them. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I've passed on and someone has finally found what I never had the courage to give you myself. I am sorry for that, more than you can know. I have watched you from afar your whole life, afraid to intrude, afraid to explain. But you are my daughter. You always were. And everything I built hoping one day it would reach you. The account is in your name. It always has been. First National, Cedar Falls. Account number below. It's all I have to leave, and it's all yours. I hope you can forgive me. George. Tyler read the letter twice, his heart pounding. He looked at Ranger, who was watching him with calm, patient eyes. What did we just find, buddy? He pulled out his phone and searched for George Fenton, Cedar Falls. The results came up almost immediately. An obituary, published 3 weeks ago. George Allen Fenton, age 89, longtime resident, retired engineer. No surviving family listed. Private burial. But the letter said Eleanor was his daughter. Tyler stared at the name again. Eleanor Whitmore. A daughter George had never claimed, never spoken to. An account waiting for her. And she had no idea any of it existed. He sat in the truck for a long time, the letter in his hands, the weight of it pressing down on him. This wasn't his business. He could throw it away, forget about it, focus on his own problems. He had enough to deal with. He didn't need someone else's family secrets, but he couldn't stop reading that last line. I hope you can forgive me. Whoever Eleanor Whitmore was, she had a father who loved her and never told her. And now she had an inheritance she'd never receive, not unless someone made sure she got this letter. Tyler folded the paper carefully and slid it back into the envelope. All right, he said quietly to Ranger. Let's go find her. Ranger's tail thumped against the seat. Tyler started the engine, and despite the shudder in the transmission, it held. He pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward downtown, the envelope sitting on the seat beside him like a grenade with the pin half pulled. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he knew he couldn't walk away. Finding Eleanor Whitmore turned out to be easier than Tyler expected, and harder than he was prepared for. A quick search at the Cedar Falls Public Library pulled up a name, a business, and an address. Eleanor Whitmore, 67, owner of Whitmore Estate Planning, downtown office on Maple Avenue. There was a professional headshot on the firm's website. Silver hair, sharp eyes, the kind of face that looked like it didn't tolerate nonsense. Tyler stared at the photo, the letter in his pocket feeling heavier by the second. This wasn't some distant stranger. This was a real woman with a real life, and he was about to walk in and blow a hole through it. He thought about calling ahead, writing a letter, leaving the envelope with a receptionist. But nothing felt right. A letter like this needed to be delivered in person. It needed someone to explain where it came from and answer the questions that would follow. Questions Tyler didn't have answers to, but at least he could say he tried. Ranger stayed close as they walked down Maple Avenue, his presence steady and grounding. Tyler's heart was hammering by the time they reached the building, a converted Victorian with a brass nameplate by the door. He hesitated on the steps. Maybe this is a mistake, he muttered. Ranger leaned into his leg. Tyler pushed through the door. The interior was warm, tasteful. Dark wood, framed diplomas, the faint scent of lemon polish. A receptionist sat behind a curved desk, typing with efficient speed. She looked up as Tyler entered, her eyes flicking briefly to Ranger before returning to Tyler's face. Can I help you? I'm here to see Eleanor Whitmore. Do you have an appointment? No, ma'am, but it's important, personal. The receptionist studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she picked up the phone and spoke quietly into the receiver. A pause. A nod. She'll see you. Down the hall, last door on the left. Tyler thanked her and walked down the corridor, his boots too loud on the hardwood floor. The door was open. He knocked on the frame anyway. Eleanor Whitmore looked up from her desk. She was smaller than he expected, compact, composed, with reading glasses perched on her nose and a pen in her hand. She set the pen down slowly. "You wanted to see me?" "Yes, ma'am." Tyler stepped into the room, Ranger at his side. "My name's Tyler Brennan. I'm a veteran, recently discharged. I bought an old truck last week from Holloway's salvage lot. It used to belong to a man named George Fenton." Something shifted in Eleanor's face, a flicker, quickly controlled. "I knew George," she said carefully. "He passed a few weeks ago." "Yes, ma'am." Tyler reached into his pocket and pulled out the envelope. "I found this under the seat. My dog, actually. He kept pawing at the spot until I looked. It's addressed to you." Eleanor didn't move. She stared at the envelope in his hand like it was something dangerous. "What is it?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "A letter from George." Tyler stepped forward and set it on the edge of her desk. "I think you should read it." Eleanor looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and picked it up. Her fingers trembled just slightly as she opened it and unfolded the paper inside. Tyler stood in silence, watching her read. He couldn't see her face clearly, but he saw her shoulders tighten, saw her hand come up to cover her mouth. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet. "Where did you say you found this?" "Under the passenger seat, hidden in the frame." Eleanor stared at him, the letter still clutched in her hand. "You could have thrown this away," she said. "You could have ignored it." "Yes, ma'am." "Why didn't you?" Tyler didn't answer right away. He thought about the coldness of his apartment, the slipping transmission, the fear that had followed him since the day he came home. "Because it mattered," he said finally, "and you deserve to have it." Eleanor looked down at the letter, then back at Tyler. "Sit down, Mr. Brennan. I think we need to talk." Tyler lowered himself into the chair across from Eleanor's desk, Ranger settling at his feet. The office was quiet, the only sound the ticking of a clock on the wall and the faint rustle of the letter in Eleanor's hands. She read it again, slower this time, then set it down and removed her glasses, pressing her fingertips to her eyes. 43 years, she said softly. 43 years I wondered who my father was. My mother would never say. She told me it didn't matter that he was gone, that I should focus on the family I had. She let out a breath. And the whole time, he was right here. Tyler didn't speak. He didn't know what to say. Eleanor looked at him, her gaze steady despite the emotion behind it. George Fenton was a quiet man, kept to himself. I saw him in town now and then, at the hardware store, the diner. We never spoke. I had no reason to think. She trailed off, shaking her head. "The letter says there's an account," Tyler offered carefully. "In your name." Eleanor nodded slowly. "First National. He mentions it." She looked down at the paper again, then back at Tyler. "I'll have to look into it. I don't even know if it still exists." "I hope it does, ma'am." She studied him for a long moment. "Why did you do this?" "Do what?" "Bring this to me. A stranger. You could have taken this letter, checked that account yourself, seen if there was anything worth taking. No one would have known." Tyler felt his jaw tighten. "That's not who I am." "No," Eleanor said quietly. "I can see that." She stood, walked to the window and looked out at the street below. Her reflection in the glass was pale and still. "You bought that truck for $2,000, she said. "That's what Holloway's charges for vehicles in that condition. Which means you don't have much, Mr. Brennan. Am I right?" Tyler hesitated, then nodded. "No, ma'am, I don't." "And yet you brought this to me anyway." "It wasn't mine to keep." Eleanor turned to face him. "The account George mentioned. I looked into it this morning after I found his name in my mother's things. She kept a box. Photos, documents, things she never showed me," her voice caught. The account has $467,000 in it. It's been sitting there for over 30 years, accruing interest, waiting for me." Tyler blinked. His mind couldn't process the number. "If you hadn't found that letter," Eleanor continued, "I never would have known. The account would have been absorbed by the state eventually, escheated as unclaimed property. George's final wish, his only way of reaching me, would have disappeared." She walked back to her desk and sat down, her hands folded in front of her. "You saved it, Mr. Brennan. You saved his voice. You gave me my father." Tyler shook his head. "I just delivered a letter." "No. You did much more than that." Eleanor opened a drawer and pulled out a checkbook. "I want to help you." "Ma'am, I didn't come here for—" "I know you didn't. That's why I'm offering." She uncapped a pen. "You need that truck to get to work, yes?" Tyler hesitated. "Yes." "And it needs repairs." "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor wrote something on the check, tore it from the book, and slid it across the desk. Tyler looked down. The number was $10,000. His throat tightened. "I can't accept this." "You can. And you will." Eleanor's voice was firm but kind. "Consider it a finder's fee, or consider it what George would have wanted, his way of saying thank you for bringing his daughter home." Tyler stared at the check. His hands were trembling. "Just until you get on your feet," Eleanor added. "That's all." Ranger's tail thumped against the floor. And for the first time in a long time, Tyler felt something he barely recognized. Hope. Tyler didn't cash the check right away. He drove home in a daze, the slip of paper folded in his pocket, his mind spinning in circles. $10,000, more money than he'd seen in one place since he'd left the Army. Enough to fix the transmission, enough to pay rent for months, enough to stop drowning and start swimming. But it didn't feel right. He sat on the edge of his mattress that night, staring at the check in the glow of the single lamp. Ranger lay beside him, chin resting on his paws, watching. "I didn't do it for this," Tyler said quietly. "I just delivered a letter." Ranger's ears twitched. Tyler turned the check over in his hands. Part of him wanted to tear it up. He'd spent the last 2 years trying to rebuild his life on his own terms. No handouts, no charity, no one else's pity. Every small victory had been earned. Every step forward had come from his own sweat and stubbornness. Taking this felt like admitting he couldn't do it alone. But another part of him, the part that had learned to survive, knew that pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not now, not with the truck falling apart and the job hanging by a thread. He thought about Eleanor's face when she read that letter, the tears in her eyes, the way her voice had cracked when she said 43 years. He hadn't given her money. He'd given her a father, a history, an answer to a question that had haunted her whole life, and now she was giving him a chance. Maybe that was okay. Maybe receiving wasn't the same as failing. He put the check on the folding table and lay back on the mattress, staring at the ceiling. "I'll pay it back," he said. "Somehow. Someday." Ranger let out a long breath, like he'd been waiting for Tyler to come to that conclusion on his own. The next morning, Tyler went to the bank. His hands were steady when he signed the deposit slip, but his heart was pounding. The teller smiled and handed him a receipt, and just like that, his balance went from 2 digits to 5. He walked out into the cold air and stood on the sidewalk, breathing slowly. Okay, step 1. Over the next 2 weeks, Tyler got the transmission rebuilt at a shop on the edge of town. Family-owned, fair price, no questions asked. He bought groceries that weren't ramen. He paid rent 2 months ahead. He took Ranger to the vet for a checkup that was overdue, and felt the knot in his chest loosen just a little when the vet said the dog was healthy. And every night before he went to sleep, he looked at the balance in his account and reminded himself, this wasn't a gift. It was a bridge. He went back to Eleanor's office the following Saturday. She was in, like he'd hoped. She looked up when he knocked on the doorframe, and something warm flickered in her eyes. "Mr. Brennan, come in." "I wanted to thank you again," Tyler said, standing just inside the door. "And to tell you I'm going to pay it back. I don't know how long it'll take, but I will." Eleanor shook her head. "That's not necessary." "It is, for me." She studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right." but on one condition. Name it. You let me help you do more than just survive. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. Sit down, I have an idea. Tyler hesitated, then sat. Ranger settled beside him. You were Army, yes? Eleanor asked. Yes, ma'am. 2 tours. And now you're working at the lumber mill. Starting Monday. Eleanor leaned forward. I've been thinking about starting a program, something to help veterans in this area get back on their feet. Job training, housing assistance, financial counseling. I've had the resources for years, but never the perspective. She paused. I think you might be able to provide that. Tyler stared at her. Me? You, if you're interested. Ranger's tail thumped against the floor. And Tyler, for the first time in longer than he could remember, said yes. The mill job lasted 3 months, long enough for Tyler to stabilize, to build a rhythm, to remember what it felt like to wake up with purpose. He worked hard, kept his head down, and earned a reputation as someone who showed up early and never complained. His supervisor offered him a promotion in February. Tyler thanked him and turned it down. He had somewhere else to be. Eleanor's program launched in March under the name Cedar Falls Veterans Initiative. It started small, an office in the back of her building, a folding table, a handful of donated laptops, and a list of names from the VA. Tyler came on as the outreach coordinator, which sounded official, but mostly meant he was the one who made the calls, shook the hands, and sat across from men and women who reminded him of himself. He understood them. That was the thing. He knew what it felt like to fill out a job application with shaking hands, to wonder if your resume would make sense to someone who'd never served, to lie awake at night replaying sounds and decisions and faces you couldn't forget. He didn't give them advice. He gave them someone to talk to. And Ranger was always with him. In every intake meeting, every home visit, every nervous conversation in a church basement or the corner booth of a diner. Ranger sat beside Tyler, calm and steady, a reminder that healing didn't happen alone. By summer, the program had helped 43 veterans. Some found jobs, some found housing. A few found their way into rehab or therapy or reconnection with families they'd pushed away. Not everyone made it. Tyler learned that early and hard, but enough of them did that he started to believe the work was worth doing. Eleanor watched all of it with quiet satisfaction. She never hovered, never micromanaged. She funded the program, opened doors, and let Tyler run it the way he thought it should be run. But every few weeks she'd stop by the office unannounced, sit down across from him and ask how he was doing, not the work, but him. "You're not sleeping enough," she said one evening in July. Tyler looked up from his laptop. "I'm fine." "You're not, I can see it." He rubbed his face. "There's just a lot to do." "There always is." Eleanor leaned forward. "You're allowed to rest, Tyler. You're allowed to take care of yourself, too." He didn't answer. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the street. George never learned that lesson. He worked himself into the ground, kept everything inside, never reached out, not even to me. He died alone in that house with a letter he couldn't send. She turned back to Tyler. "Don't make his mistakes." Tyler looked down at his hands. Ranger shifted at his feet. "I'm trying," he said quietly. "I know you are." Eleanor's voice softened. "And I'm proud of you." The words hit harder than he expected. He hadn't heard them in a long time, maybe ever, in a way that felt like it meant something. He nodded once, not trusting himself to speak. Eleanor walked to the door, then paused. "There's a community center across town. They're looking for someone to lead a peer support group for veterans. Meets every Thursday. I told them about you." Tyler blinked. "You did?" "I did. It's up to you whether you want to go." She left without waiting for an answer. Tyler sat in the silence for a long time, Ranger's head resting on his knee. The laptop screen had gone dark. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. He thought about the first night in the apartment, the empty walls, the cold fear, the certainty that he'd made a mistake. He thought about the truck, the letter, the moment Ranger had pawed at the floor and changed everything, and he thought about what it might mean to walk into a room full of strangers and say, "I've been where you are. Let me help." He reached for his phone and typed a message to the community center. "I'm in. See you Thursday." Ranger's tail thumped against the floor. The first Thursday group had 4 people. By October, it had 14. They met in the basement of the community center, a circle of folding chairs and a donated coffee maker that Tyler learned to keep running. The veterans who came were different ages, different branches, different stories. But they all had the same look in their eyes, the one that said they were barely holding on and hoping someone would understand. Tyler understood. He didn't run the group like a therapy session. He ran it like a conversation. He let people talk when they needed to and sit in silence when they didn't. He shared his own story, not all of it, not every time, but enough to show that he'd been in the pit too, that climbing out was possible. Ranger was there every week, moving through the room, leaning against whoever needed him most. He had a way of knowing. He always did. One evening, a woman named Maria stayed after the group. She was Navy, 2 deployments, struggling to find work since her discharge. She'd been quiet during the meeting, watching more than speaking. "How did you do it?" she asked Tyler as they stacked the chairs. "Get from where I am to where you are?" Tyler thought about it. "Someone helped me when they didn't have to, and I promised myself I'd do the same thing for someone else." Maria nodded slowly. "That's it?" "That's it." She came back the next week, and the week after that. By January, she had a job at a local nonprofit. By spring, she was helping Tyler run outreach events. That was how it worked, one hand reaching back to grab another. By the 1-year anniversary of the Cedar Falls Veterans Initiative, the program had served over 200 veterans. Eleanor hosted a small reception at her office, cake, coffee, a few speeches. Tyler stood in the back with Ranger, uncomfortable with the attention but grateful for the people who filled the room. Afterward, Eleanor found him by the window. "1 year," she said. "You've built something real." "We built it," Tyler corrected. She smiled. "You know, I went back to Holloway's last week, looked at the spot where you bought that truck." "Why?" "I'm not sure. Maybe I wanted to see where it all started." She paused. "It's strange, isn't it? A $2,000 truck, a hidden letter, a dog who wouldn't stop digging. And now this." Tyler looked around the room, at the veterans laughing, the volunteers refilling coffee, the banner that read, "CFVI 1 year strong." "I didn't plan any of it," he said. "I just followed what felt right." "That's what character is," Eleanor said. "Doing the right thing when no one's watching, and trusting that it matters." Ranger leaned against Tyler's leg. Tyler rested his hand on the dog's head. "I'm thinking of expanding the program," Eleanor continued. "Opening a second site in Miller's Creek, maybe a third next year." She looked at him. "I'd like you to lead it." Tyler stared at her. "All of it?" "All of it, if you're willing." He didn't answer right away. He looked out the window at the evening light falling across the town, at the rooftops and the steeple, and the road that wound past the salvage lot where he'd stood a year ago with nothing but a fading hope and $11 to spare. He thought about George Fenton dying alone with words he couldn't say. He thought about Eleanor finding her father in a folded piece of paper. He thought about every veteran who had walked through the door of this program looking for someone who understood. And he thought about himself, the man he'd been, the man he was becoming, and the one choice that had started all of it. "Yeah," he said finally. "I'm willing." Eleanor smiled. "Good." Ranger's tail thumped against the floor. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the lights of Cedar Falls began to glow. Sometimes the most important things are hidden where no one thinks to look, and it takes someone with nothing to lose to find them. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And remember, the kindness you give when you have the least might be the thing that changes everything.